Well, friends, in the face of Donald Trump retribution, one big law firm, Paul Weiss, refuses to fight and instead caves to Donald Trump to the tune of $40 million. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. Okay friends, let's set this new reporting up with the shortest Team Justice Law School class ever. Extortion. It is a criminal offense under the laws of Washington, D.C. to obtain something of value or to compel another to act through threats or coercion. Let me say that again and boil it down even further. It's a crime in D.C. to obtain something of value through threats or coercion. That's extortion. There is a kissing cousin crime to extortion called bribery. Bribery and extortion are used interchangeably, and they're very similar crimes. But basically, extortion is obtaining something of value through threats or coercion. Against that backdrop, let's turn to the new reporting. This from the New York Times. Headline, Law Firm Bends in Face of Trump Demands. Paul Weiss, one of 3 law firms targeted by President Trump as part of his retribution campaign, said it resolved the conflict by agreeing to a range of commitments. And that article begins, President Trump and the head of the law firm Paul, Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison, LLP, have reached a deal under which Trump will drop the executive order he leveled against the firm, Mr. Trump said on Thursday. In the deal, Trump said, the firm agreed to a series of commitments including to represent clients no matter their political affiliation and contribute $40 million in legal services to causes Trump has championed, including the president's task force to combat anti-Semitism and other mutually agreed projects. It's unclear how the money will be used to help the task force. The firm, Trump said, also agreed to conduct an audit to ensure its hiring practices are merit-based and will not adopt, use, or pursue any DEI, diversity, equity, or inclusion policies. The deal materialized after the head of the firm, Brad Karp, went to the White House this week and had a face-to-face meeting with Trump. There's no reporting about whether Brad Karp went on bended knee or not. My editorial addition. Had a face-to-face meeting with Trump to discuss a resolution. Members of the legal profession said in interviews that they were surprised by the deal, as it appears as if the firm, which is dominated by Democrats and has long prided itself in being at the forefront of the fight against the government for civil rights, was capitulating to Trump over an executive order that is likely illegal. Obtaining a thing of value through threats or coercion. That's extortion. What do we have here? We have Donald Trump punishing a law firm for doing something, of which Donald Trump disapproves. And as the New York Times accurately reports, it was an executive order that was likely illegal. And Paul Weiss, the law firm, the head of that firm, goes to the Oval Office and says, wait a minute, we'll give you $40 million in legal services to help your political priorities. And Donald Trump then says, well then, I'm no longer punishing your law firm. Obtaining a thing of value through threats or coercion. It feels a little extortion-y, doesn't it? You know, other law firms are on the receiving end of these likely illegal executive orders. A firm called Perkins Coie, for example, they went into court and they're fighting it, and they will very likely win. But not Paul Weiss. They buckled. They caved. They capitulated. For reasons that, maybe someday we will know. If it is something as ugly as a cost-benefit analysis or a profit margin, that's shameful. Let me turn my attention to one other aspect of this story. I turned on cable news this morning. I don't spend that much time these days watching mainstream media, corporate media, legacy media, but I watched some of the reporting about this deal that was struck. And I heard mainstream media referring to this as unconventional negotiating by a president. This was just an unconventional negotiation. You know, friends, that would be like saying, if Donald Trump went out on the White House lawn and shot and killed people, mainstream media reporting that as, well, this is just an unconventional form of population control. No, it would be murder. It would be a crime. And corporate media, legacy media, dumbing this stuff down when Donald Trump does it is doing real damage to the prospect of us keeping our republic, saving our democracy. You can't give in to the aspiring dictator. You have to stand up to it. You can't just roll over, play dead, give him $40 million so he will lift his likely illegal executive order. That is us just slouching toward autocracy. And, if this qualifies as extortion, and it sure seems to fulfill the legal elements of the crime of extortion, Paul Weiss could have asserted itself as the victim, could have brought a legal challenge to this likely unlawful executive order, as did another big law firm, as I mentioned, Perkins Coie, and they could have fought it out in court, and they very likely would have won. But rather than assert themselves as the potential victims here, they just rolled over. There are times when law enforcement has to stand up for victims, when victims won't stand up for themselves or can't stand up for themselves. I thought about a parallel from my days as a career prosecutor. I prosecuted domestic violence cases, including domestic violence murder cases. And let me tell you, friends, domestic violence is a vicious cycle, and there are times when the victim of domestic violence can't or won't stand up for themselves. They tell the police and the prosecutors, I can't cooperate against the perpetrator, my abuser, because things will only get worse for me. And in those instances, it was our responsibility as prosecutors to step in and try to protect victims who were unwilling or unable to protect themselves. We had to try to protect them. We had to try to hold the perpetrator accountable. We had to try to protect the community from that perpetrator, even beyond the domestic violence. The problem is, if the victim, this law firm, Paul Weiss, won't assert its own rights, won't fight this in court, we sure know that the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the federal prosecutors who are under Donald Trump's thumb, courtesy of Attorney General Pam Bondi and characters like Emile Beauvais and Todd Blanche, we know they're not going to do anything to protect victims against Donald Trump's suspected illegal conduct. So where does that leave us? You know, it leaves our government and our democracy hanging in the balance. And friends, you have to wonder if this was a profit-driven decision by Paul Weiss, if it was a cost-benefit analysis, you have to wonder if folks who are considering using the legal services of that law firm that capitulated to Trump versus a law firm like Perkins Coie that is standing up to Trump, in essence standing up to, you know, the creeping dictatorship and autocracy, the abuse of governmental power and authority and the office of the presidency that Donald Trump is engaged in by trying to punish law firms like this. You have to wonder, you know, if those clients have to choose between law firms that take those two approaches to the rule of law and to governmental abuse, overreach, and corruption, you know, which of those two law firms, and I know there are lots of others out there, but if it was a choice between those two, which firm would clients gravitate toward, feel more comfortable being represented by? I am not here to say, let's boycott this law firm for making a decision or that law firm for not making a decision. But I think if it's a profit-driven decision by that law firm, in the long run, they may have done themselves more harm than good. You know, because you would think for a law firm that traditionally was involved in pushing back against government abuse and overreach, in, you know, asserting the civil rights of all people, a law firm like that, you would think that to the Paul Weisses of the world, justice matters. But maybe not. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.